They call him the company whisperer.
Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
And Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Dando.
All right, Kirk, we're here, episode 8. We were not replaced by Chat GPT. Kirk GPT is what we were calling it in the last episode on AI. We are here actually to talk about winning today, what winning looks like in the business. And actually, just to kind of go back a little bit, a lot of the warning signs of success that we've been going through in this season have really been about these tools and systems and frameworks for how to navigate the messy middle of scaling a business. Mm-hmm. And today is messy in itself too. It's more about, what happens when things are going well, and how not to go backwards in that. So can you kind of help set the table for what today's conversation looks like?
Yeah, it's today is going to be for those leaders that are really experiencing some level of success. We talked about in episode 1, the thesis and execution and the macros and that CEO growth gauge. These are for those leaders that are experiencing some level of success, and it's fun. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. But often without, really noticing it, things start to slip below the surface. And I would say if there's an overarching theme or arc for this conversation that we're getting ready to have, it's that if you're not actively rebuilding as you're growing, you're silently breaking. So today, people are going to learn about how to really spot or recognize the patterns of performance erosion, that phase of growth when momentum is really masking decay. And we're going to really unpack 3 warning signs of success and really teach people how to lead through those.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So before we get started, just wanted to kind of give a call to action here for our listeners. This season is the For You Leader season, focused on the 12 warning signs of success. We've got all sorts of different content, reflecting on 30 years for you, your business, the lessons learned. We talked about it earlier, 4 years worth of offsites, $17 billion worth of successful exits. So you've learned a lot as you've worked with these leaders. To get in touch with you, best way to do that, reach out to you on LinkedIn or go to the website, www.kirkdando.com. Is that all good with you?
Yeah, I'd love it. I love the conversations that I've been able to have that have been stirred up by, what you and I have been doing. The feedback that we've gotten that has helped us, get better. Even, like I said, from our last episode, even what ChatGPT is telling us about how to get better.
ChatGPT is a pretty good coach.
If
you train it right, I've been throwing transcripts from our first 6 or 7 episodes into it, and it's been helpful to get that kind of qualitative feedback from, I guess, AI, and get the help and help us get better. So
yeah, no, I've really enjoyed doing this with you, Spencer. I was just reflecting on this as I was driving in. We've done some of these where we've gone till 11 or 12 o'clock at night. Today is a Sunday. We've had the whole family in here, and just emotionally and how powerful that was. What an honor that was for me, and so I'm really grateful. We've got a handful more of these left in the season. So.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for you and for being able to do this together. Obviously, hope it's helpful for our listeners, and excited for today's conversation. Today, we're going to talk about how success increases the weight and the importance of what is being worked on in the business. But with that growth, it's revealing whether you're built to handle that. And so you talked about how if you're not actively rebuilding as you're growing, that there's this decay or that you're breaking. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so today's episode and the things that I want people to be able to hear and understand is, and most people would agree with this, most businesses don't fail with just a bang, just like overnight, they go away. It happens sometimes, but it's not very often. Businesses fade with kind of a shrug or looking the other way. And sometimes it's because things are going really well, or they give in. They give in to what feels normal or what they think are growing pains. And it just happens very subtly. And then when they give in, and I've talked about this in previous episodes, they give up. They give up on the hope that the environment can be harnessed, that what feels like normal but really underneath is really chaos can be corralled. And it can be, and that's what we're here to talk about. And oftentimes those things, we're exceeding revenue projections. We're hiring, we're in the press, we're growing, and it feels really, really good. But just underneath, we start to see where kind of unchecked egos start to blind us. that hubris. We see where accountability maybe starts to slip a little bit, maybe where some of our systems, the things that were working earlier, start to decay. And this is really what I call that performance erosion. It's kind of counterintuitive. It's the very things that we want to have happen in the business, that success, that growth. But if we're not careful, just underneath that, we are starting to see some decay. And that's really part of the reason I've come up with the 12 warning signs of success. The 12 warning signs of success, and I really want people to understand this. We've come up with some catchy names and some ways for people to kind of think about these and maybe even metabolize those. And we're going to talk about how to action those in the business so they don't come in and become these serial killers that strangle our hope and, more importantly, strangle our ability to win. But they are not random. They are patterns that uniquely are only come about because of success. And I've seen these happen in every high growth company I have ever been around across all different industries. But here's the good news. They're predictable. And we've talked about that. And because they're predictable, they're avoidable. But here's what's unique about I think what is unique about the 12 warning signs of success, and you kind of let me know how you think about this, is there's so much written and talked about how to be successful and what it takes to be successful and what constitutes success. Mm-hmm. But when we were growing our company, and there's even groups where people gather together to learn what other people are doing to be successful. When we were growing our company and we were successful, we grew that to be $1 billion in sales, not enterprise value, but in annual sales business. There was very little that was talked about the issues that growth and success cause. They come with their own set of issues and their own things that need to be understood and dealt with. And that's really what these 12 warning signs of success are about. And so, as we dive into this, I really want people to understand that the 12 warning signs of success really give you a shared vocabulary. That's the purpose of them. They're not random, as I said. They really fit into 4 categories. And each of those categories reveals some level of strain that only happens because of success. So I want to kind of go through those 4 categories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. What I would also add to that is that you've provided an inordinate amount of resources on this. There's worksheets, there's decks, things that you can go through, documents that we've been sharing in these episodes. And so I'd encourage listeners, if you haven't tuned into those, don't just go listen to the conversations, go download those resources. Those are free, available through the website. These are things that you put together, you share with your leaders as you coach them. Super valuable resources that I find really, really interesting.
One of the main purposes of this season of doing this is for me to kind of leave it all on the field. And so there's things that I've seen that work, there's things that I've seen that have not worked. And what we've tried to do is put in the show notes the things that really are simple but impactful. The things that maybe are a little bit counterintuitive, but are the things that actually, you watch these threads pulled through over 16,000 different conversations. In the times that I've gotten over 30 years, we have download and we'll continue to, and we're going to do some from today's show notes as well. So let me go through each of these kind of 4 categories that the 12 warning signs of success fit into. The first category is around people and people decisions, and that's where it really all starts, is with people. I was talking to Mitchell Green, who is one of the co-founders of Lead Edge Capital, who recently was named the #1 performing private equity firm in the world. And actually, he's going to be a guest on an upcoming episode. He was talking about predominantly one of the best things that they do is they help get the people right. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. So this first category is really about the people decisions. So that's where we've got the right idea, but we may have the wrong person or people that's leading, or they're not even ready to lead, and we stick with it for too long. So here's the warning signs of success to watch for in this people category. First one is what we call right idea, wrong person. That's where the leader was perfect at one stage, or maybe even in a different company and you hired them, but they're now holding the company back. And you may not see it, but everyone else does, which interestingly makes them wonder, what you're doing or why aren't you doing something about it. The second one is called professionalizing mediocrity. This is promoting people into leadership roles before they're ready, or because just simply they've been around and they feel like they deserved it. And it really takes what was an excellent opportunity and what everyone feels like was a big opportunity and turns it into a mediocre opportunity. And the third one is what we call open door, closed mind. This is where leaders say they're open to change, to new things, to innovation, but they actually end up blocking change and growth or the truth. And oftentimes it's not because of the change itself, it's because of the emotional weight of change. And we talked about that in episode 3. And what I found is that sometimes it's hard for somebody to hear the truth when their paycheck depends upon them not being able to hear the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So that's the first category. The second category are your systems and structures. And we talk about this in episode 4. And this is even great people. So let's say we got the people part of it, figured out. They really can't overcome a broken foundation. If the systems and org structure aren't built for scale, success will start to break down. So here's the warning signs in this category of systems and structure. Houston, we've got a rake organization.
My favorite name.
we talked about that. Flat organizations where too many people are reporting to too few people. And oftentimes those people really aren't ready to lead. This creates what I call human speed bumps or bottlenecks that slow everything down. If you want to know what your real organizational structure looks like, don't pull out the published one. Watch what happens when key decisions need to be made. Is the path of least resistance back to a few people? Is it where people aren't really allowed to make decisions even though we have a structure that says that they are? Pressure test. Another one in this category is hope is not a strategy. We spent a lot of time talking about this and how to really de-risk this and when we talked about the growth playbook in episode 4. But this is where we have big goals with no operating system, really that leads to a kind of an opaque clarity, which is kind of a paradox, and sporadic accountability, which makes everyone feel like they're working really hard, but in a disconnected way. And people would just emotionally feel that. They're like, man, we are working hard, but we feel like we're disconnected. Why is that? How do we solve that? And then the other one is fake values. This is where what is written on the walls is not what's happening in the halls. So what's written on the walls is not happening in the halls. And nothing will kill a culture faster than recognizing and rewarding the wrong people or the wrong behaviors. Third category is really our culture and our values. In episode 5, we went through and took a deep dive into these areas, but this is when people, recognition, and our systems are misaligned. It shows up in the culture when that happens. You see where morale starts to drop, friction starts to rise, and then you start to see where communication breaks. And these are all, once again, these are all things that in themselves are not a problem. It's a problem when you don't do anything about it. Like I said, you don't become a bad leader because you have the wrong people. You become a bad leader when you leave them there too long. You're not a bad leader because you have problems. That's part of success. That's what these are about. You do not get to experience these things I'm talking about unless you're successful. I want to double down on that. Companies that aren't successful, these are not their problems. Trust me, these are not their problems. But if you leave them too long, then they do become things. And that's what effectively can make you a bad leader. But the warning signs to look for in this category of culture and values are drinking the chaos Kool-Aid. You'll see busyness gets celebrated, interestingly, more than progress or results. And you say, why would anybody in their right mind do that? No one would in their right mind. But sometimes, once again, we give into what we see as chaos. We overlook the overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, and we end up celebrating things. And sometimes if hope is our strategy, what we were talking about earlier, we just hope that if we encourage people for their activity and for their effort and for their intentions, that somehow will turn into results. And we should recognize effort, but we should only reward results. The executive iceberg of ignorance. This is when leaders are essentially they're out of touch with what's really going on. They've either created conditions where it's not safe to share the truth of what's happening. They don't really, they think they know where the problems are, where the bodies are buried. They don't really want to take the emotional energy and time it takes to sometimes help people get the right context. So a lot of times I've seen where people have brought problems up that weren't really problems, but from their perspective it was, and they were sincerely thought like, Chicken Little, the sky is falling in. And sometimes we have to take time to help them say, I understand why you think that. I know why you feel that way, but let me help you understand the bigger picture of things. And so you walk them into a better level of understanding, more clarity. Keep on talking about more clarity. But I see it's where sometimes people either don't want to take the time, or because they've created this drinking the chaos Kool-Aid environment, they don't have the time. And so what ends up, we end up with this iceberg of ignorance, where the true things that really the business needs to hear and know. We talked a lot about, if you listen to a business, it will talk to you. And I'm not just talking about the people, I'm talking about like the business. It is a legal person. And if you'll give it a voice, it'll talk to you. If we have iceberg of ignorance, that's where the business is screaming, saying, please listen, please create conditions of safety and trust for people to be able to share what's really happening. Make time in your one-on-ones to please listen. Create rhythms in the business. We'll talk about this. Erosion, performance erosion, loves ambiguity. It really does. It's like cancer loves sugar. But execution loves rhythms. It loves clarity. And so the executive iceberg of ignorance is a warning sign that in this category needs to be watched out for. And then the poor performance multiplier. Once again, it's where we're multiplying unintentionally, but we're multiplying and rewarding poor performance. When incentives and recognition go to the wrong people and they reward the wrong behaviors. And the real top performers become disenchanted and disengaged. Mm-hmm. Once again, you say, like, who would do that? No one would ever do that on purpose. Exactly. No one ever does any of these things on purpose. Mm-hmm. But they happen consistently. And I would venture to guess people that are listening, that are maybe living on the other side of some of these, or are experiencing some of these warning signs that I'm talking about, are shaking their head yes. They're going, oh man, I wish we could talk about this. I wonder if I can get so-and-so to listen to this podcast. I wonder if they'll go through the journey to the top, that PDF that we put in the show notes, those kind of things. And once again, that's the intention, is just let's move closer to the truth on these things. It's not like let's create a bunch of drama and here's all our problems and everything else like that. It's about like, let's address these boldly. Let's address them with clarity, with transparency, not with shame and blame. And then the fourth category, the one we're going to talk today about in episode 8, is the performance erosion phase. And this is really, to me, this warning sign of success, these three can be three of the most dangerous of all the warning signs of success, because they show up, interestingly enough, when the business looks and is successful. But we start to see where the edges are fading, where execution is starting to slip, and nobody's really calling it what it is.
For me, it's easy to think about that and think, I guarantee most people listening to this would be able to pinpoint and hear where the business or someone in the business or themselves have thought, oh yeah, we've got a people problem. We maybe hired the wrong person here. Or we need to hire here, and I don't know how to make that step. Or we have a system problem, and the way we run this meeting or that meeting or follow up on this is a problem. And you can kind of go through that with culture and performance, but it's easy to stop and think that you've gotten beneath the surface when you say we've got a people problem or a system problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the majority of the reason why, I think you said in an earlier podcast that 90% of companies will stall out before they reach that full potential is because they don't know how or aren't willing to go deeper. Mm-hmm. And these warning signs are meant to take you that layer deeper and do the discovery and the hard work that it requires to get through that stage. And you've seen and helped companies get through that stage, so you know that it works.
Mm-hmm. I remember a number of years ago, Central Market, which is born and birthed out of HEB, is here in Central Texas. It started in Austin, Texas. When they had one store, I was giving a talk at something. I can't remember what it was, and there was someone that was someone that just worked in the store that was at the talk, and they were like, "Oh man, you've got to meet so and so, the person that was kind of had started Central Market," and that person in that environment, they had the safety to take it to the leader and say, "Hey, I think you should talk to this guy. He talked about these things, and I think maybe he could help us." And so I started working with Central Market, and it was really a great experience. Obviously, it's a great brand, and it's now. I remember they said they would never ever, kind of move out of the Austin, and now they're up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and everything else like that. But that started because someone on the team, one, had the courage, and two, they had created the culture and the environment where the person could raise these kind of issues up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great story. Very applicable to this. So, for today's conversation, you're really talking about that performance erosion. I guess kind of before we jump in, how can we reflect on these 12 warning signs of success, and how can someone listening use these today?
Yeah, this is it's a really good question. It's one that I'm often asking when I'm listening to podcasts or listen to someone give a talk. It's kind of like, so what? Now what? Like, how do I use this? And so I would, and we would encourage people to download that PDF, Journey to the Top. And in there, it talks about, the phases that companies go through, kind of the characteristics, kind of the problems, once again. And it's not so much an educational tool, like something you need to read and understand. More importantly, you need to be able to use it to communicate. But at the end of that, it goes through kind of a thumbnail description of each of the 12 warning signs of success, and gives you ability to kind of grade those. And I would encourage people to go through and grade them for themselves, but share it with the team and let them go through it and create an environment. Maybe it's at a quarterly offsite. Maybe it's in a one-on-one. Maybe it's just a special one-off meeting to go through and let people kind of discuss, not just which ones they think they are, because once again, that can create drama and it can stir up problems unintentionally. It's about, what are the solutions? What's really going on? How do we deal with this? These are not overnight fixes, but what you'll start to see is kind of the poison come out of the bite, if you will. You'll start to see where people will start to let what they believe is pain and suffering transform them. And when people feel like they're transforming into something better and more useful and more powerful, you'll see their physical posture starts to change. You'll see where their motivation, you'll see where their mindset goes more towards winning. So use that Journey to the Top, and that's why it's called that, to go through and do this and have some real conversations, ask some intelligent questions like, hey, what are we tolerating that used to be excellent but isn't anymore? And why are we tolerating that? Mm-hmm. Another one is if we fixed one of these warning signs, I love this one, is just, don't try to fix them all. Don't boil the ocean, but say, hey, like, there's 3 or 4 of these that feel like they sting when we read them. Which one, if we were going to fix this quarter, which one would it be, and why? And you don't have to necessarily fix it, because some of these things don't get fixed in a quarter. Some of these things you just got to keep your eye on, like revenue hubris, which we're going to talk about today. It's the point of having the conversation. It's the point of saying, hey, it's safe to have this conversation. It's the point of saying, like, hey, these are typically root cause things that are showing up. They're spinning off different symptoms. So what will we do this quarter? Another one is where are we scaling problems instead of solving them? Mm-hmm. Where is it that we're letting these things start to grow like barnacles on a ship that we just need to go wash off? And which warning signs of success is actually our growth, our success? Which one of these 12 is actually our success hiding from us? Because like I said, these don't come through the front door. They don't make an announcement that, hey, we're here. They don't show up in armored cars and bands playing. They sneak in the back door.
Well, let's use that then to navigate our way into the first warning sign of success for today, revenue hubris. Talk to me. What is revenue hubris all about?
Revenue hubris is one of those things that's interesting, because isn't that what we want? Not hubris, but isn't that we want recognition? We want growth in our revenue side of things. That's why we're in business. That's why we're forecasting it. But but that in itself becomes the trap. When revenue is flowing, we feel invincible. I have a lot of examples of companies that have been growing like crazy, profitably. They start to justify things, hires. Maybe they loosen up a little bit on the systems and processes about how they go about hiring because they are needing to grow so fast. So they get people kind of on the bus, if you will, and not only in the wrong seats, but on the wrong bus. Software perks, because we're crushing it, right? Like we're doing well. Why? I mean, it's just, and we may have spent so much time wringing our hands and worrying about ever even getting to this point, or we may have gotten a tiger by the tail, and it's like, we gotta act while we can. Like we've cracked the code, on whatever this is. Everyone else can't figure out how to grow a business, but we have. And so you start to see where, like I said, that's these unchecked egos or this kind of hubris that starts to get in. But at the end of the day, that's really not scaling. That's selling and spending.
Mm-hmm.
You stop asking the hard questions and you lose that urgency. You start to really react to the momentum versus leading that momentum. Once again, it's really, really subtle. This is something that when I'm working with high growth organizations, a lot of times, if they're really in revenue hubris into this, they won't even reach out to somebody like me because they've cracked the code on this thing. But what they don't understand is just beneath the surface is this decay. And you've got to be able to kind of see it. And how you see it is you got to get out and be able to listen to the business. Like I said, that's what we're talking about, creating some of these conditions. But there's examples of what this looks like, and I'll draw it up or show you here in a minute. But.
I love the easel.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
definitely want you to draw. You can kind of transition up here to the easel if you want. If now's a good time for that. I'll say this as you do that. It sounds like success, and there's signals of success, like you said. How did you put it? You said spending and selling.
Yeah. So it's not scaling; it's selling and spending.
Yeah, you're selling and spending, and so those are like signals or maybe behaviors, but not necessarily direction. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily saying that we are headed in the right direction. It just means that we have signals or behaviors that can lend us to that. And maybe you are selling and spending in ways that are helping you grow.
Yeah.
Right. So like I would like to leave room for that on this one.
Mm-hmm.
But just because you have those signals, I think that the heart of what you're trying to say is that those early signals aren't necessarily indicative of direction.
Yeah, and I'll give you some examples here in a minute of just kind of what are some of those signals that you're not selling and spending in a responsible way. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's KPIs. That's why there's like the rule of 40 that we've talked about. That's why there's revenue per team member. There's different things that are kind of tell us if there's erosion that's starting to happen. And obviously, if you've raised money through venture capital, private equity, they're going to want to know that, and they're going to help you see that and look at those indicators so those things don't start to happen. But this is, and I've drawn this in other episodes, but this is just a simple example. So if this is growth,
you love a good chart.
Oh yeah.
For our audio.
Are you impressed that I started there and ended up right there?
I was gonna say that's a different. You normally don't do it that way.
Yeah,
so
no, I know.
That's great.
It's a trick. It's a trick my dad.
Call out what you're drawing here for our audio listeners as you do it. Okay.
Yeah. So this is a trick that my dad taught me, and it's actually kind of applicable to everything we've been talking about. Is I didn't start here and draw. I looked here and drew. I just kept my eye right here.
Wow.
Draw to where you're going.
You learn something new every day.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
There you go. And this is time.
Is that like the high five thing?
Yeah.
Like where you look at someone's elbow.
Yeah.
Always hit every time.
That's right.
It must be the same.
That's
signs.
right.
Okay, so you have growth on the left
and time over this.
axis.
And so if this is revenue, we're seeing where revenues are kind of doing this, but that it's kind of in this climb here is where we can get into that revenue hubris. And I've seen this many, many times where, the difference is either, cash or profit. But if these are costs, I'll see where it does this. And this difference, like I said here, is either profit or cash. Cash, and this isn't a very fun time right here.
Where the expenses outweigh your
Call that
revenue.
going through the gap or going through the eye of the needle. And a lot of times people say, oh, no, we're not doing that. I said, well, let's go back and look at your financials. I mean, I've literally had people argue, and I'm like, let's just go back and see what's happening. And this is, like I said, they don't go out with a bang. It's a slow fade. It's a shrug. It's a looking the other way. It's justifying these expenses. It's having forecasts that allow us to be able to raise money based on when we're here, but we haven't built the good habits inside the business that allow us to stay disciplined, to keep that rigor, to enjoy it and celebrate it, but not let it become the thing that is the, Saturday morning hangover. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm looking for when I'm working in businesses is this is a great time. You just want to be able to keep going. There are some very sophisticated investors that look for businesses that are in this area, and they've become distressed. They know they have what it takes. They figured out a good thesis. They've got decent execution. They've just gotten a little bit maybe sloppy with it. And the macros, the market is there. Now, sometimes a company can get pushed into the gap because the macros change because of what's happening in the market. That does happen, and it was no fault of their own. I have companies I've worked with that has happened. That absolutely can happen. So I want to be clear about
that. To a ton of companies.
Yeah.
I came out of ad tech, for example, and campaigns were flying off the shelves from agencies and brands all across the industry. And then as it added back, I couldn't imagine, I'm not a numbers guy, but I couldn't imagine being a controller or finance guy, trying to map out your costs versus planned revenue when no one knew how quickly or how much was coming back, because we also were starting to undergo the AI revolution.
Well, and that's what I was just going to say, right? AI and what's happening there in this new era. We'll talk about this. You don't get quarters to fix things. You get weeks. Because your competition, because it's a productivity tool at the end of the day. And if you don't learn how to use it and embrace it, it'll push you into this. So I'm not pretending, and I want our listeners to really be clear that there's not just one reason this happens, revenue hubris. I'm just saying this is a reason that it happens. The other thing is we talked about in episode 1, if you realize that you've got a good thesis, now typically you don't get to experience this if you never had a good thesis, but sometimes, like I said, with AI, it's changing, it's changing the landscape in doing those things. But there's some investors that look for companies that are in that, and they figure out where's the problem? Why are they here? What happened? Was it execution? Was it that they had the wrong people in key positions? Was it that they maybe had the right ideas, but they once again left people that weren't capable leaders in those positions too long? Did they not have the systems and processes that can handle the weight of growth? Or was it because of the thesis? Maybe they didn't have a big enough TAM, what we talk about, that total accessible market. Maybe they thought the market that they were selling into was actually going to behave in a way that it didn't, whatever the case may be. And then the third one, and we've talked about this, are the macros. Did something happen like COVID? Or did something happen where, right now with the change of administration, federal funding and a lot of things, we're hearing and reading about that a lot. There's a lot of people that were depending upon the federal funding that they no longer are getting. That changed the macros. They may have had fine execution and their thesis and what they were selling into was fine, but the market shifted on them. Mm-hmm. And so what you don't want to get pushed into is with revenue hubris, because you figured these things out, right? You've done the heavy lifting. You figured these 3 things out. Don't let your team and your way of behaving numb you out. And doing that. And so they'll look for companies. And in this now if you've got a board of directors that maybe aren't experienced operators, which happens a lot, they're good investors, but they're not experienced operators. And we talk about this in a coming up episode when I'm talking to literally iconic CEOs and private equity people and venture capitalists. They'll hear in these upcoming episodes, they'll say that one of the things is you have got to vet the people that you are bringing in money from. And we'll talk a lot about that. And they talk about how to do that. But one of the things they say is that they're not operators. They have people that are in their limited partners or general partners that are, and they help put them on the boards to help in that regard. But the point being that I'm getting to in a very long way here is most times, if they're not, they'll blame execution. They'll say, well, this is your problem. We need to cut costs, or we need to introduce a new product or service. And they don't really appreciate that, hey, if it's one of the thesis are doing, fixing execution isn't going to do anything. It's just going to stall it out that much longer. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really important, because you've got to be able to step back, because if it's an execution problem, that's one kind of investor that they come in, guess what? They'll put the right team in place, that'll put the right systems and processes in place, and they'll pop this through. If it's a macros issue, they probably aren't going to even invest in it, and they're going to wait and see if you figure it out. Mm-hmm. If it's a thesis problem, once again, they'll usually bring in that expertise and help. But two of the hardest things, and I've said this, two of the hardest things to do in a business are change your thesis and change your culture. Because if you change your thesis, it's not that you're changing out your products and your services and your customers. The people that have been there, that have been building it, were conditioned and trained and capable of providing the service or the product or whatever it is. And now we're kind of shifting it. So a lot of times you have to change out entire teams. That's why that makes that hard. And then a culture where maybe we built it up where we want people to really feel good, where we are, once again, celebrating busyness and not outcomes, until we hit this, and all of a sudden we're only going to celebrate outcomes, but a bunch of people's muscles have atrophied. And now you're going to create a culture where, no, we're going to be about performance. You've got a bunch of people that are like, hey, what happened? I think that's probably, I haven't read that book, but I know the essence of it about Who Moved My Cheese. I think that, that's what that's doing. But anyways, all this going back to revenue hubris, this is one of the reasons that you get pushed into this. These are reasons that are you need to understand. Revenue hubris, that's a choice.
It's really well laid out. I was even thinking, like, if you try and tackle the execution side of things, just looking at the chart where, like, okay, you're trying to get costs back in line with revenue, you could probably bring costs down pretty quickly. I'm sure that there's companies that specialize in how to do that.
Yeah.
But if revenue falls too, I mean, you don't have an execution problem. Now you're really tanking performance all around.
Yeah. And when cutting costs is a one-time gift. So, and that's fine. Sometimes you have to do that, but you better use that gift wisely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, and changing the thesis, I mean, that's a very difficult task than the macros of waiting things out. I mean, in the moment with how COVID was going, you waiting it out, you don't know how long that'll take. And there were also companies that came out of that wouldn't have succeeded, without it, frankly. So,
oh yeah,
I mean,
I have some companies that succeeded because of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these are all signals that it's messy.
Yeah.
Right. It's messy going through all of this. I mean, even the administration stuff you listed out, I work with sustainment. I lead our marketing and revenue operations, and we do stuff with the defense sector that gets impacted by the way that the budget gets deployed from the administration. So when we went into a continuing resolution at the start of the year, I mean, that changed the way that we navigate that. But all of our fiscal planning, which is obviously done the year before, was banking on those processes that have been done that way for several years now would stay the same. So when things got thrown up in the air, I mean, it becomes very difficult to pivot and work through those times. And thankfully, we've been able to do that. But I know it's very difficult. I've seen those inner conversations and understand how painful and messy and how this can show up in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate you saying it really does show up in a bunch of different ways. And we're talking about one sliver, revenue hubris. So I really appreciate you kind of doubling down on that, because I don't want to make this sound like this is something to be aware of, but there are much more obvious, or maybe not so obvious, but there are many other reasons why you get pushed into the gap that we need to be aware of. And once again, it highlights the fact that if you don't understand this stuff, guess what happens when you're down in that profit and cash part, that wide open part? Guess what happens?
You get complacent?
No. Well, yes, that can happen, but see if you can read my mind. Remember Tim Keller?
Oh yeah, success goes to the head, but failure
Yeah,
goes to the
and
heart.
what happens goes when you get in the gap,
Yeah, yeah,
goes to your heart.
yeah. It's a great way of laying that out. Success goes to the head, but failure goes to the heart. You get to the gap, and
Yeah, but if you don't understand these things, you better hope it's an execution problem, because that one you can fix.
yeah, or it's the easiest relatively of the three to fix.
If you solve the wrong problem, you're not going to get to the right answer. And so most of the times that's where I see is people are, it's either revenue hubris, it is thesis, execution, or macros. There's some reason that they are either heading towards, and that's the hardest part, is when somebody's heading towards the gap, is trying to convince them that they're headed there. Because that's where that ego starts to blind. And sometimes you got to have a good old crisis to get your attention.
Yeah, because the gap they can see on paper is that revenue is high and costs are below revenue.
Yeah.
So it looks like success, feels like success, but it's not, and you're about to run into it. I mean, it goes back to how you say this is all predictable, and because it's predictable, it's solvable.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of power in that statement. Before we move into the next segment here, you brought up Keller, and I don't think that was part of the plan here, but I think it's really well timed that you did that. If I'm a leader listening to this and I'm in the gap today, like if I'm just in the gap feeling it, the fear of failure has hit and the weight of that is crushing me, it's found its way to my heart. Speak to me for a second. What are some words of encouragement or next steps that I could take if that's where I'm at today?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. It hurts to even hear you ask that question, because I'm walking that journey with some people currently, and I have walked that journey. And what I would tell you is that the problem is not bigger than you. And you may have made some choices that you regret, that you feel like got you here. Welcome to the world. We've all done that. I would encourage you to step back from this and really try to identify what the real issue is at the core. And that's why we've talked about these things. Because at that point, you've moved as close as you can to the truth, and then you can start to solve it. And if that seems cloudy, or you're like, I don't know what to do, and once again, this is not a setup question, reach out. Reach out to someone like me that can help, or reach out to somebody that can help, that has been there, that has done that, has climbed this mountain. But being in that gap, it'll take your energy, it'll take your sleep, but don't let it take your identity.
That's really well said. Is there anything else you want to add on revenue hubris before we go into the next warning sign of success?
No, I think, once again, I just want to emphasize that there's not a system or process to do this. It's about awareness. It's about consistency, which we're going to talk about in the next.
Creating that shared language.
Creating that shared language. Yep.
Okay.
That'd be able to name what's really happening.
Cool. Second warning sign of success today, then, that we're going to go over: random acts of accountability. Walk me through this one.
Look in the CEO growth gauge, the two things that if I ask people, if you had a magic wand and it could only do 2 or 3 things, 99% of the time people say we would have better communication and more consistent accountability. And so that's where your best people are wondering what your underperforming people are doing, or even worse, what they're doing is they're doing their work for them. And it doesn't create an environment of winning. It creates an environment of a little bit of hostility. You get top performers kind of scratching their head. They're the ones that, they won't tolerate it for too long. But it shows up in weird ways. I think is when we become frustrated with other people and we don't really have the relationships that can handle the weight of the truth. It shows up in kind of cryptic, kind of backhanded comments inside of meetings. Once again, we start to lose hope that those people are actually going to do what they say they're going to do. And so those random acts of accountability really tear at the fabric, at the foundation of a business's ability to succeed. And the reason that it shows up oftentimes is because we haven't been clear. What does winning look like? Are we really rewarding performance, or are we rewarding activity? Once again, that goes back to some other warning signs that we've talked about. We haven't been clear on what does accountability really look like. You and I talked about this in an earlier episode. What is our definition, not Webster's definition of what accountability is? not even what ChatGPT's definition of it is, which it may be good. I haven't asked it, but but what's our definition? And my experiences have been that accountability isn't simply doing what you say you're going to do. That is a lost art that we all should bring back. And it seems overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, but so few people do it. But beyond that, kind of three simple things. What's going to be accomplished, who's going to do it, and by when. And then that individual takes that responsibility seriously. And they put it in their calendar. They write it into their routines. They have a weekly routine that is keeping them on pace. But then life happens. Something goes wrong with a customer. I have a personal life crisis that's happened. I can name 50 other things. Well, it's my responsibility to come back to my manager, my leader, my team, and say, hey, I need to negotiate when I'm going to be able to get this done. Or I need help reprioritizing because 4 more things just showed up. Or a client is now asking for this feature that is a critical client that is completely off anything that we've talked about doing strategically. Help me reprioritize. But the point being is I don't let the date come and go and just like, remember how I said businesses don't fail in a fade, they fade with a shrug? This is one of those shrugs of like, I can't do it all. Like nobody's doing it all. Everyone else is dropping balls right and left and everything else like that. And so what is our clear definition of accountability? What does success look like? And how, this is the key, how do we apply it consistently? I see that's the random acts of accountability instead of random acts of kindness. Mm-hmm. Everybody would like random acts of kindness. No one likes random acts of accountability. It's just not applied consistently. There's things that you can do about, having good, clean one-on-ones and how to structure those things and how do you not just make them transactional, but where you're really drawing out that person and learning where do they see the bodies are buried? Where do they see the opportunities are to improve? What are these 12 warning signs that you see that are occurring, and doing those kind of things and building those conditions of trust and safety. And then rewarding it when it works, but also the consequences for when it doesn't. In this day and age, consequences are like, well, I can't fire them. Well, this isn't about firing. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. This is, you can coach them. I know there's put people on PIPs, performance improvement plans. Those can be helpful, but long before things start to show up in the red, there's conversations that should have been had that weren't.
Yeah, it's really well noted there at the end. I mean, there's so much of what you just said I think is super valuable. One thing I want to touch on, there's a lot of power in data, and I think that you probably don't even give enough credit to how much data you've collected on that one question. Mm-hmm. You go in and interview 15 people at a company when you go in to coach the executive and hear what the business is saying. And that question gets asked to everybody. So you've probably asked thousands of people that question across hundreds of companies over the last 30 years. And you're saying that 99% of it boils down to those two things, which were...
If we could just have better communication, which needs to be unpacked because that can mean a lot of things, and if we just had better accountability.
Right.
And so when I start to peel back the layers on those things.
It's super powerful. Credit to Lauren, your daughter, for she listened to, countless hours of Zoom calls and put a cool spreadsheet together with a lot of data to get that insight. Yeah, I don't think you realize how powerful I think that statistic is that you sit on with that. And it really guides a lot of that. The other thing is that in this, I totally get what you're saying in terms of, it's not that you don't have goals, but just that the follow through is confusing. And I feel like this point is a lot about, you've talked in previous episodes about moving from, we need certainty. I need to know, is my job going to be here tomorrow? Are we going to hit that goal? And the reality is that a company matures when you can move from certainty to clarity, and how you provide clarity. I think this one is about how you move from confusion to consistency.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'm going to use that. That's really good. No, that is. I was sitting with a leadership team, give you a little bit of context, $100 million a year in sales, about $20 million to the bottom line, sitting with that leadership team this week. And by their own acknowledgement through conversations that we'd had and things we had revealed, is that they as a leadership team were unintentionally introducing more confusion into the business than clarity. And what they were saying is like, we need our people to own this. And what they were trying to do is empower their org chart. Saying we've got these tier of managers, these tier of leaders, and we need them to own and have responsibility to this. And just a couple more questions beyond that showed that you guys haven't given them the clarity for them to perform. So therefore, your real org structure is, Houston, we have a rake, because when key decisions need to be made, we say stuff like, well, we need to empower our teams, or they need to take responsibility for these things. But the reality of it is they hadn't done the work to drive the clarity on what are the outcomes we're going for, what are their responsibilities in getting those outcomes, because they maybe thought they were clear on the outcomes, but no one was responsible for, and there was not a time frame. So that confusion does not create accountability. And so it happens so subtly, is my point in bringing that up. And I really appreciate kind of what you're saying there is, people like certainty, they can't operate without clarity. However, if you're, as a leader, your responsibility is driving clarity. You're doing one of two things. And so it's kind of that simple and that difficult wrapped up together. Step back and say, what am I doing that's driving clarity versus confusion? One of the things they were doing is they weren't replying to each other in Slack. And I said, that's like walking down the hallway. I say hello to you, and you just kind of look me in the eyes and keep on walking. It's like, at least say, like no one here is like creating extra work for people. If somebody's reaching out for something and needs something, like, you guys have created a culture where just kind of ignoring it is okay. Is that driving clarity or confusion? Frustration or joy? This is hard enough. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. That's just common respect. This isn't Harvard business, level stuff.
Isn't it funny how the rules of engagement have changed with technology?
Yeah.
Remote work environments, all of that, it's changed so quickly. But I mean, what you're saying at the core is so true, of just showing respect to one another, being available, being communicative and clear about expectations, about where things are at. I also love about this random acts of accountability. You're not trying to let things skirt under the rug, right? Where, okay, yeah, I said I would do that, but I'm just assuming that they're going to be okay that it's not getting done because they know these other things popped up, right? It's about intentionally being willing to speak into it. And I will give you a personal example of that, not a professional one, a personal. This is really easy as a parent and as a spouse at home.
It's easy in all parts of our lives, but you keep going. You are really onto something here, Spencer. This is good.
So there's a whole host of things that McKenna and I at home with our 3 kids that we are focused on. Today's a Sunday. So how did I spend this morning?
Tomorrow's your anniversary.
Tomorrow's our 7th anniversary.
Yes.
Yep, that's right. And so we spent the morning getting on top of life. Our oldest is starting kindergarten here in about 10 days. And so, it's a matter of, okay, well, we got to shuffle the closet this way. We got to get the existing laundry done. We had taken a couple of trips, one of which was to come see you up in Colorado. And there was still laundry left over from that. And that's kind of the whole point is like, first off, I'll say this, there's always competing priorities and there's always going to be new things that pop up. And so if I don't go to McKenna, what I've learned in our marriage is that we do better when I call those things out so she knows it's still on my mind because it matters to her. Because, right, the reality is at home, the laundry, the dishes, I mean, yeah, you can let things slide, but that's her office. That's her work environment. She's at home every day. So if I leave the dishes, if I leave the laundry, I mean, it'd be like if I cluttered a bunch of papers on your desk and I told you I'll clean those up tomorrow, but then I don't know, I get pulled into a couple of meetings and you come back and you expect those papers to be gone and they're still there. And it's like, well, but I got pulled into those meetings, right? Like it's just a matter of showing respect. I love how you put that, showing respect to other people, that they're worth following up with it. It's worth going back into and to say, hey, I know I promised you that thing. I'm expecting that they'll be understanding when I share my world with them. Like these are now the things on my plate. Here's my plan, not like, hey, help me solve this, but like, here's my plan of how I plan to tackle this. Are you in line with that? And I've done that with McKenna as things pop up, conflicts in the calendar that compete with priorities that we said we would get done at home. And I don't do it often, but when I've done that, I notice that she is a lot more peaceable and feels heard and seen and cared for, even if the thing moves, even if we move the date.
Because she feels understood and heard.
Yep.
Understood
Exactly.
and heard. Like if you wanted to diffuse the situation, make somebody feel understood and heard. And I want to put an exclamation point on what you're saying because you brought up a really good example. So when people say to me 99% of the time out of 16,000 different conversations, if we just had better communication and more accountability, you just gave a great example of what better communication. It's not like, oh, look at my list of stuff. I've got 75. Let me overwhelm you with all the stuff I've got to do. That's not helpful, but it's like, hey, I've got these 75 things to do. And I know that you have got these 10 that you've asked me to do. I want you to know I heard about this. I want to help, or here's how I think these kind of slot in and prioritize them. And I told you I was going to have this one done by, tomorrow. I should have gotten to you earlier. I apologize, but it's just, life has happened. Can I renegotiate that? I want you to know that's important. If no, I can't move, and say, well, I made that commitment. I need to keep it if I can, whatever the case may be. But that whole piece right there is what I mean by better communication. They don't need more communication. It's respectful, clean, clear communication. You want to create a team of motivated people, show that you're going to apply accountability consistently and you're going to reward it. And you will see people start to feed off of each other's success.
That's a great
versus
point.
Complaining about each other's look the other way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I see that. Just a quick note here. I don't want to take us away from this last segment of the day too far, but our CEO, Brett Boyd at Sustainment, he's an incredible leader. One of the things, if you asked anyone in our company that they would tell you about Brett, is that, if he's told you once, he's expecting you to get it that one time. And it's true. And it's one of the best things about him, because if he's having to come back to you and ask you again, at that point, it's almost like it's not too late, but you know what I mean? He doesn't feel that respect, or he's tried to communicate that was of importance. And so we have a culture where there is freedom to say that's too much right now. But when you commit to something, you commit to it, and he expects that it'll get done. Yep. And that you will figure out how to get it done, and that you will raise your hand and say, hey, I need to reprioritize if it can't be done.
Yeah. Well, he does that. I mean, he needs to answer this for himself, but I'm guessing he does that not because you need it or someone else on the team needs it, or he likes it. Fundamentally, he's doing it because that legal person that doesn't have a voice, that doesn't have its own values, called the business, needs that.
Yeah.
And he's serving the business. And by doing that, he's serving the people that have invested. He's serving you guys as leaders in the business. He's serving the customers, because ultimately that's going to show up in what you guys are doing for your customers. So it's no small deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it is big. I mean, you have a note in here. I want to pull out of the show notes from this that you said it is overly obvious, embarrassingly simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
That's a bit way that we'll wrap that one.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the third warning sign of success for today: sowing the seeds of decay. Talk me through that.
So everyone's probably heard the saying before, and I think there's actually a book written about it, but what got you here won't get you there. However, it might actually, the things that got you here might actually be starting to drag you down or pull you down. And so this is where you're still, this isn't about that we have broken systems. They're just maybe outdated. We're still using the systems or processes and maybe even the mindsets that early on really helped us succeed. So that company that early on that I was the chief financial officer and chief operating officer, before I got there, one of the things that they had multiple different offices. And in each of those offices, they would plant a leader. And what they did is the business was struggling early on, years before I got there. And so they decided to give each of these offices, either they gave actual ownership to some of the people, not all of them. I don't know what their decision process was in that. But for every single office, they created a bonus and reward system where how you did in your office, in your particular office, was what you got rewarded on. It wasn't across how the whole business was doing or anything else like that. That was seemed like a small thing, but it caused the business to actually take off. And so they really hit this what I'm talking about, this deep profit and cash where the business grew successfully. The revenues were growing relatively well, but they started noticing, once again, the cost started coming. They grew themselves into the gap. I came into the business when it was in the gap. I didn't know the gap was a thing, but that's when I came into it. And so the very thing that made them successful, it was not intuitively obvious, was now the things that was sowing the seeds of their decay. Each office had become where they'd kind of put a moat around them. They weren't sharing best practices. They were stealing each other's customers. They were justifying just about any behavior. And really what happened is we say, gosh, I want everybody to have an owner's mindset. Well, they did to an extreme. And it really hurt the overall business. And so you can imagine how popular it was when I said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to be about the business. I thought it was a good idea. I was like, everybody like this is so obvious. And once again, it just about cost me my job, because the very system or process or mindset that had made us successful, I recognized was now the thing that put us into the gap and was sowing the seeds of our decay. It wasn't so much as, I guess it was kind of a system or process, how we were rewarding and recognizing and what we said was valuable. We had just lost our way, that there was a bigger business that was suffering because of that. And so that's what this sowing the seeds of decay is about, is really, this includes, kind of legacy tools. You might see where maybe we have manual reporting, and it's not obviously broken. And here's the deeper danger, and it's what I just described, and it's what I walked into, is you're really emotionally loyal to your playbook, whatever that is, whatever the things are. Those are not the things that get pulled to the middle of the table and scrutinized. Those are the things that we emotionally protect, so you don't question it. And that's what I want people to hear about this, showing the seeds of decay, this warning sign of success that happens in this performance erosion phase of growth, of success, is, how are we going about auditing our systems? The questions I was asking earlier, where's growth hiding one of these warning signs of success? Where are we tolerating things that used to be excellent? And I said, one of the hardest things is to change a culture. When you set up a culture like that I came into, where people were rewarded for their individual performance, and you change it to where it's going to be about what's happening across the organization and how they contribute to that, you lose people. Mm-hmm. And when you're young, about 29 or 30 years old, and they're about 40, 45 or 50, like I said, it's hard to hear the truth when your paycheck depends upon you not being able to hear the truth. Mm-hmm. It was brutal, and I had no idea what I was stepping into. The good thing is by the grace of God, He gave me the vision to do what the right thing was for the business, but I didn't feel that when we were in the gap. You're asking, talk to somebody that's in the gap, what's going on in their heart. Not only was it going on in my heart, I was young and didn't know thought I didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. Years later, I actually did the right thing.
What was the right thing?
Is we changed that whole plan. 2 years later, we were doing over $1 billion in sales. I talked about this in, I can't remember, episode 1 or 2. I sat down with the people, and I had that 4 quadrants of where people were at, either brilliant jerk, rock star, a wonder, meaning people are wondering why you're here, or you were a rock star at one point, but you've kind of become a falling star. And I had that conversation with them, which that wasn't super popular, but I got the right people that wanted to win, that understood why we were going to do this bigger, that they'd been experiencing an orange, but I was wanting to give them a watermelon, and got that. And the people that just liked their orange and wanted to protect that had to go. And so the right answer was, one is get the right people headed in the right direction, and then change the system. Or we kind of ran parallel, kind of did both. And like I said, when I went in there, I was there for a couple weeks, and the CEO said, if we don't turn this thing around, I'm going to shut it down. And I was like, I'm not very good at interviewing. Yeah. And 2 is, he's telling me this because he wants me to help. The first one was true. That was not very good. The second one was not true. He didn't really want help, but he did want it fixed. And so I didn't know what it was. And that's why I've been able to give so many words and so many examples. And like I said, 30 years later, seen this play out so many different times. If you would have talked to my 29, 30-year-old self, I could not have drawn that or explained that. I could just feel it. And so the right thing was to change the culture. And it was brutal.
Well, the cool thing is that your 60-year-old self can tell the 30-year-old self, put words and visualizations to it because you've experienced it. This isn't like you've read a bunch of textbooks and separated yourself from reality. You've gone through it yourself. And so I think that's a very powerful part of why we do what we do with this season. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and you may not like this question.
Well, then don't ask it.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see if this makes it. But how do you feel about companies like large Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that cut the bottom 10% every year, just as a principle? Like that is like a rule or a playbook that they depend on. What's your stance on that?
I have not personally. I've heard about G. That's kind of Jack Welch. That's kind of a famous part of what he did. And I've not personally worked with a company. I've had board members that have kind of recommended that to companies, but no one has ever really done it. Like anything in theory, I think it makes sense. I think it's a forcing function to look and see. First, you got to define what does the bottom 10% even mean, right?
So creating definition.
Yeah. Second is people should understand what it means inside the business so they know what top performance. So you're being clear about what performance looks like. Can it be a little bit of a scare tactic? Well, it's a scare tactic if you don't do it. But if you're doing it, it's not a scare tactic. You're doing it. And so in theory, I think it can create some good disciplines and some good behaviors, some good forcing functions to do that. In practicality and how it gets carried out, it can almost become like a badge of honor of like, oh, we cut 10%. Oh, we're so, and it sounds good. It might make for a neat article or a neat question in a podcast. But the reality of it is these are humans on the other side of it. You've got to, what else are you doing? What else are you doing to make sure you don't have bottom 10%? So what if you did this? What if you had said, here's what it looks like to be in the bottom 10%. But our commitment is never have anybody there because we're going to coach you. We're going to give you opportunities. We're going to be clear on what your role is. We're going to give you responsibility to actually impact our bottom line and our outcomes and really help and perform for our customers. And there's no reason you should ever be in the bottom 10% because we're going to do our part. The only thing that's going to get you to the bottom 10% is you. That'll be a choice you get to make.
I think that's really well said. The other thing I wanted to ask you, AI revolution, how is that changing all of this?
Oh man, we're just coming off the podcast, and even since we recorded that one, and things have changed so significantly. When it comes to sowing the seeds of decay, AI is a productivity tool at this point in time, and it's gonna, I think, continue to expand. I think anything, we're gonna learn to overuse it and kind of course correct and go back to the middle of the road. But when it comes to sowing the seeds of decay, at least this particular warning sign, AI is it's exposing, which is great. Those clunky, kind of clunky structures that we have are those manual processes that aren't really helping us, or like I said, those sacred cows, those things that are, we're emotionally tied to. It's bringing those into the center and exposing those things. But more importantly than any of that, and it's giving us an opportunity to get better, is what it's doing is it is forcing us to use it as a productivity tool, to understand how it benefits the business, how it really helps our customers, because we don't, as I said earlier, we don't have months or quarters to figure this out. We have weeks. I said earlier, businesses don't fail with a bang, they fade with a shrug. AI is going to make it where they fail with a bang.
I mean, at the heart of it too, there's this idea that I think you sow seeds of decay when you stop innovating, just to put it simply. And on that topic, I just did I moderated a few sessions at DFW Startup Week this past week. And one of the guys there, He most recently was the chief innovation officer for a really large digital media agency that's well storied here in the DFW area. And he's been doing it for the last 15 years. He's a pioneer on AI, super smart guy.
Mm.
And one of the things he said really stuck with me. AI was a question we got from the audience quite a bit, just around it, how it affects marketing, branding, scaling a business, startups, all that kind of stuff. And the thing he said was that, someone basically asked him, like, is AI just coming for all of our jobs? Like, is this the inevitable? And he said something to the effect of, AI probably shouldn't take your job. Like, if you're doing it well, it probably shouldn't take your job, but it better take the tasks of your job that hold you back and slow you down. And if it's not, it probably could take your job.
Yeah.
And it was a really good way of framing it, where it wasn't a scare tactic, but it actually was a motivator of like, man, where can I use, a productivity tool like AI in my workflow today to make me better, not necessarily to replace me. And he was talking about human ingenuity and how there's things that AI just won't be able to replace. And I know ChatGPT just rolled out their newest model, their 5.0, and that's supposed to have a little bit more, human reasoning to it and whatnot. But still, I mean, I think that they're, like you said, today, as of filming this episode, it is still a productivity tool. And as long as that's it, the question isn't, is it coming to replace me, but more so, what can it replace that I'm doing so that I can, add more value to the business? And I would use that point to segue back into what you were talking about earlier when you gave the regional model. It probably, I'm just guessing on this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people became incentivized in their own regions. And I've worked in structures like this where you're bonused out on your region's performance. So you want your region to do well, and then the company succeeds when everyone wants their region to do well, and it pushes them to a new level they didn't think they could reach, versus people feeling disconnected of, how does my book of business, play into the broader book of business, which is a much larger number than my own book. So it almost contextualizes it a little bit easier for the person to say, I see how I'm contributing, and then how we're contributing to the broader picture. Do you see companies fail because they lose sight of the mission, or because they lose sight of like helping people feel connected to the solving?
It's a great question, and there's a kind of a hidden or subtle answer in there. And it's what happened to us. This example I was talking about in our company. It wasn't because we lost sight of the mission or the vision. It wasn't because the incentive program was written wrong. At the core, it was because we had a handful of people that were selfish. And no matter how we wrote that incentive plan, no matter how many times we and creatively marched out the mission and vision, they were going to be people that were most interested in what they could get out of it. Like I said, there's leaders that are for you, there's leaders that are against you, and there's leaders that are for themselves. And we had a handful of for themselves leader, and unfortunately they were the top performers.
That'll make it complicated.
It made it complicated. It did. And it was a risk, and it was idealistic at that age for me to think that, but it worked out. And so, yes, you can lose sight of your vision. I see people that say that the customer's the center of everything, and you watch how they make decisions, the customers know we're a part of it. That's true in life. I mean, we all can have some fade and stuff like that. We all need to be reminded of those things. But I think too many times we blame fading away from the vision or the mission or the purpose, or we wrote the incentive wrong. If we just rewrote this incentive, if we just added this or tweaked this, or maybe we reward them for the regionally and for the company and for being a nice person and sometimes, like, you know what? People don't set out to be great leaders, they set out to be great people. If I have to have an incentive to change someone's behavior, it's not going to work. You just get people to have the right behavior, and then you give them a good incentive. And so that's a long drawn out, but you kind of hit a nerve there on something that's really important. Is sometimes we want to fix the symptom, and sometimes you got to go back to the core. And that's where I said at the beginning of this, it starts with people. And to your example with the AI, I don't know, did you ever? You may not be old enough. The Bionic Man.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's an old
I'm
show.
dating myself.
But anyways, people that are, anybody that's listening that watched it knows what I'm talking about. But it was someone that was, I can't remember exactly. I was young when it was on. But I think they were injured, and they put, like, like these bionic kind of, repair parts, and all of a sudden they could run like 60 miles an hour and everything else like that. And so it didn't make the person not a human. It made them a faster, more capable human. And that's really what AI is, productivity. It's kind of like, can candy make you a gymnast? No, but it made Tootsie Roll. There you go. That's dad joke. But I think that's what AI, is. Like I said, it's a productivity. It's not going to, shouldn't take your job, but it should, if your job is dependent upon tasks, and that's the value that you bring, then up your game.
Yeah, be more dependent than just on task execution.
Mm-hmm.
That's really well said. So let's bring this home here. So there's 3 warning signs we've covered today: revenue hubris, random acts of accountability, and sowing the seeds of decay. What connects all of these?
It's really simple, and I think it's kind of the underlying thread of what we've been pulling through here. It's called leadership drift. It's not because people stopped caring. It's because leadership stopped noticing, asking those questions, the things that we've talked about. And today, as we just talked about, AI is compressing all this. It's making competitors be able to move faster, and we're in this new era. And so we don't, that drift, once again, it can't be something that is just, a shrug or a fade that happens. And there's really 3 places to start to kind of action this up. One is do a cost to value review. I mean, really spend some time to do this, get some time on the calendar and this, what are we still paying for, either in time or money? Because sometimes time is our most valuable asset that we have.
You talked about expensive meetings, that concept.
Exactly.
So that's a great, quick, we do meeting reviews, sorry to interrupt you, but we do meeting reviews at Sustainment, like once a quarter. Brett will come in and ask, he'll say, okay, the people that are on this call, is everyone needed? Like, what role is everyone playing on this call? And we've found ways to trim people out of meetings to get essentially time back, which time is money in a startup, especially. So
absolutely, cost to value, right? And we've talked about how to grade your meetings. I can't remember which episode it was in, but it was in one of the episodes.
Earlier episode.
We went through all the structure of how to do that, because I've had clients that I've had them go through the mental gymnastics and math to figure out, and they're spending $23-25 million a year, obviously a little bit larger organization, inside of meetings, and they would grade their meetings at a 6 based on a set of criteria.
That's episode 4.
Episode 4. Okay. So that's, go back and listen to episode 4, cost of value right there. Doesn't cost you anything to start grading meetings, but you are spending a bunch of time and money and brilliance in those things. So another one is kind of do what I call a culture of clarity and accountability audit. Define what is great and then align it to the outcomes. Like what is great? What is it that we need to be doing beyond just our OKRs? But what does it mean to be, a respectful communicator in our organization? What does accountability look like? What does it mean to be a manager? What are the competencies of a really effective manager? I see people that get promoted before they're ready to leadership. Well, you asked me about cutting the bottom 10%. The one way you keep people out of the bottom 10% is you help them understand what is needed, what are those skills, and then you help them get those skills. You don't spoon feed them. You don't sit them down in a room and have them go to a bunch of leadership training with no accountability to any change or behavioral growth or mindset changes. You invest in them to the degree they're willing to invest in themselves. So these are the things that start to create that culture of accountability, and then apply that consistently. Just step back and say, okay, couple questions. Is it clear to everybody what accountability means in our organization? If you're not sure, go ask some people. What does it mean to be accountable in our organization? Not, and if all of a sudden they're looking up to the right, and they're trying to think, like, okay, there, you've got your answer. You don't need any more words. So get clear on that and then apply it consistently. Are we applying what it looks like? Ask people doing that. That's one way to kind of do that. And then kind of a systems audit for scale readiness. Are we ready to scale? What are our systems doing? And so, rebuild your infrastructure, for the company that you either are today, more importantly, the one where you're going. Look at your org structure. Look at the other parts that we've talked about in these warning signs of success. Too many times we're holding on to, like I said, we're emotionally invested in our playbook. I think a lot of people today are using AI to challenge a lot of things, and that's a good thing. And that kind of helps with that. So those are kind of 3 practical, kind of easy, you could do those tomorrow kind of things. Don't be stressed out because, I talked about some things that maybe you're like, we got 8 out of the 10 he's talking about. Like, pick one.
Yeah, what I love about all of these kind of go back to creating intentional rhythms. And I mentioned Brett has instituted that. It's a statement where I wouldn't say he like has it on the calendar, but it feels like he does once a quarter, where he'll start asking in every meeting that we're in, like, is this meeting needed? Is this meeting too long? Are there too many people on this call? And you can almost see the wheels turning of that cost to value exercise going on in his head with meetings. So having intentional rhythms is one, and then the other is fostering a culture of innovation. And I feel like there's so many great companies, so many stories, success stories that you see, companies that just kind of peter out, that they lost the sense of what it looks like to innovate. And as you said, AI is compressing that more than ever. It's also making it more accessible, which is creating more competition, more companies, more people that are being able to jump in, who are willing to do the hard work, who are innovators in and of themselves. So what does it look like to spur on innovation in your company, not just as you, the leader, but the people in your team?
Yeah, and I mean, the question you ask is just put an exclamation on that, is what does it look like to innovate in our company? What does it look like? Because it's different for every single company. When was the last time that we pointed to something and said that how we innovate? Not that was innovative, but how do we innovate? Does that make sense? It's a difference. Like some innovative can happen and be like, that was so innovative, but it was serendipitous. It was by accident. It was beautiful. It was wonderful, but it wasn't intentional. Like, how do we? That's
Yeah. No, it's a great call out. Anything else you want to add on this topic?
No, I just, when you start talking about those rhythms, we've talked a lot about that, quarterly, monthly, one-on-ones, weekly, those rhythms. And I said this earlier, is Erosion loves ambiguity. But the execution that we talk about up here, it thrives in those rhythms, in those clarities.
Got to ask people some hard questions.
Yeah. And so, I want people, as we wrap up here today, again, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to spend time with my daughter tomorrow on your anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I want people to hear, we go through a lot of stories. We take some long paths and turning around, but I want people to hear is you don't need to fix everything, but do fix something, because there's something that needs attention. There's something that needs attention, because performance erosion, this phase, is only invisible if you refuse to look. That's what I want people to understand. This is not like there's 18 systems and 7 steps in this. Performance erosion is only invisible if you choose not to look. But when you start to look, that's where real leadership begins. So let's remind everybody, let's climb.
It's a great reminder. Let's climb. Thanks so much for this episode. Best way to find you, either on LinkedIn or www.kirkdando.com. Subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts for more of this leadership content. Kirk, thank you as always.
Thank you, Spencer. When it comes to raising capital, the biggest mistakes I've seen didn't happen before the raise. They happened because of it. In episode 8, we talked about performance erosion, the slow fade that happens when systems, culture, and clarity can't keep up with growth, or they get hidden because of it. And nothing accelerates the erosion or exposes it faster than capital. That's why our next couple of episodes, we go deep into the funding conversation. In the next episodes, I sit down with one of the founders of the #1 performing growth equity fund in the world. Iconic founders, CEOs, and private equity partners who have raised, deployed, and returned billions. And here's what I've seen. Most leaders are asking the wrong questions. They're ignoring the signals, or they're operating with the wrong mindset when it comes to raising capital. We'll unpack the real costs, often hidden in the term sheet, what great investors actually look for, and why raising money isn't the finish line. It's just a pit stop that will determine how or if you get to cross the finish line. Whether you're bootstrapped, Series D, or somewhere in between, these next couple of episodes will challenge how you think about capital, control, and and what it means to really scale. Because what I've learned is the right capital multiplies your mission, but the wrong capital multiplies your mistakes. You do not want to miss this.
Thank you for tuning in to the For You Leaders podcast with Kirk Dando. If this episode helped you think more clearly or act more decisively, that's good. But the journey doesn't stop there. Subscribe for more content on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or go to Kirk's website at kirkdando.com to inquire about coaching opportunities. Now think of a friend, family member, or business leader in your life. How could you help normalize their journey today? Share this podcast with them. We hope that this sparks meaningful conversations in your life and that it enables you to become the leader that you aspire to be.